I've never done drugs, but I've learned a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
From hearing all these stories, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just in your DNA.
That's what you're going to hear is mine.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Tell me your story. Where are you from?
I'm from Georgia, sort of. So are we starting?
Yes.
Okay. So my dad was in the Air Force. And so I grew up everywhere. I grew up a little bit in the Philippines also, actually, overseas, which was really cool. But I landed in Georgia at 9 years old. So I feel like I'm mainly from Georgia. I feel like I'm mainly from the South.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was your family like?
I had a really great family, which is kind of what I was about to say. I feel like I'm sort of a poster child for it being genetic, a genetic predisposition. Mm-hmm. I had a wonderful family, all of like the stereotypical. My dad coached all of our little league teams, and he was a pilot. He ended up flying for Delta Airlines, so we had health insurance and like a nice house and all of the things that you think create a really successful adult and typically do, right? And I was really academically focused and driven also. I did really well in school. I took like 5 AP classes my senior year and did really well on my SATs and applied early admission to a college in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice or the first woman president.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, well, I didn't do any of it, so. But I had all these like big dreams and did well on my SATs, blah, blah, blah. Got into this good college. And then the summer before my senior year, my parents split up. They divorced. And like a lot of people's parents get divorced, and it's never pleasant, but I lost my mind. Like I completely lost my mind. When I look back, I think I had a nervous breakdown for 2 years. But I was a teenager and, I continued going to school and stuff, but I just completely lost my mind. And I kind of consciously gave up on anything good that I was doing, like starting with academics. I barely ended up graduating, but I'd already gotten an early admission to that school. So I was still able to go, but like if I hadn't applied early admission, I probably wouldn't have got in.
Was it an ugly divorce for your parents?
It was, but not any uglier than, like, there was no abuse, there was no, they said a couple of things about each other, but not even that much. You know what I mean?
Did you stop seeing one of your parents?
No, I didn't. I definitely saw my dad less, but I still saw him only because he, moved into a different house and I didn't live with him anymore. But I still saw him. My dad and I are super, super close. I think that's maybe what made it so hard. We're super close and we still are. And then with him just not living in the house, it just really, affected me negatively. Yeah. And it seemed like it came out of nowhere. Obviously no one knows what goes on behind closed doors other than the couple, but seemed like it kind of came out of nowhere. So I think just like the shock value of it combined with all the stuff that people love about families, like Christmas, and, all those things were just gone. So I completely lost my mind and started leaving school early every day. Like I said, I still went and graduated, but, kind of barely. I had never really drank or smoked weed before that, even though a bunch of, kids at my high school did. Kind of started drinking a little bit then, but then went to that college, and I just couldn't make it work. I was so sad. I was so sad. And I remember thinking that nothing mattered. Like nothing that I thought had mattered. I felt tricked, I was like, y'all two idiots played by the rules and this is what happened. So I'm not going to do it anymore, because studying is hard and I don't really want to do that. But one of the things I think I had to reconcile with later is that there are all these hallmarks of addiction that were present in me before any of this happened, right? Like delusions of grandeur and the rules don't apply to me. I always wanted to take the easy way out. And those things were always present long before my parents' divorce, And there's a lot of addiction on both sides of our family. They don't actually drink or do drugs, but basically everyone else. And so I think there was like that kernel of addiction just like waiting in my brain. And I've come to believe now, 20 years later, that something else probably would have kicked it off also as an adult. I think that at some point it would have come up, but I'm actually really grateful for that too, which I'll, kind of get into. But it kicked off. First, it started with me like rebelling at school. I went to this college in D.C. and I just couldn't go. I was so unlike the other kids. I felt like they were normal and I just like wasn't normal anymore. And I'd seen past the veil into this like suburban bullshit picture. And I was like, none of what they're saying is true. You just don't know, but I do. So fuck it, like I'm not going to AP Spanish, So I didn't. And after a semester at that school, I left and went to the University of Georgia for a semester. But I couldn't make it work there either because, it wasn't the location, obviously. It was me. I was like broken somehow. So I decided, and this is one of those first glimpses of the delusions of grandeur thing, I think. I decided that I didn't want to graduate from college anymore. I wanted to move to LA and be a famous actress. And I literally thought that it would be easier for me to win an Oscar than to get like a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia. That felt genuinely...
That's probably how 90% of actors do it.
You have to believe that or you wouldn't come here. Or you would get here and leave. Like, it is difficult to live here. I mean, LA is, it's tough. Again, in retrospect, I'm super glad that I did. But so I took a year off to bartend to save money to move to LA. And that is when I first did cocaine for the first time. And I remember thinking... Because I was like a goody two-shoes in high school. I was like kind of a nerdy good kid. I was never going to do anything like that. And I did coke. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, is this how other people feel all the time? Like, I can do this. I can do life like this. I can't do it that other way. Like, I'm too sad. I can't live like that anymore. And cocaine made me nicer, like made me a better bartender. I was way more helpful. People like would ask me what kind of drink they wanted. I'd be like, I don't know, what do you like? But if I wasn't on coke, I was like, I don't know, get a beer. It just made me nicer. But my addiction was really, really progressive. Like that whole year, I never even bought it. I just would do it with whoever had it at the bar. And I still went to LA. I saved up money. And I got into a school out here called the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and drove across the country and lived here and landed in Koreatown. And I didn't go to that school either, even though I'd gotten in, because again, I just couldn't make things work like other people did. I couldn't show up in the ways that other people showed up, So I didn't finish that school. And in LA is when my cocaine addiction really started to escalate. So it got really bad for the first maybe 6 months that I lived here. And then I quit completely for 3 years. And I always looked to that 3-year period as evidence later when I was a homeless heroin addict that, I'm not really an addict because I quit once for 3 years. Not acknowledging that though I didn't do cocaine for 3 years, I smoked weed and drank every single day of that 3 years. And really what had happened too was I had found meth. And so I subbed meth, not for long, I did it 3 times. I found meth and it was way better. And I remember I had this Marilyn Monroe calendar in my room and I marked on my calendar, okay, I'm gonna do meth these 3 nights and not do cocaine.
Meth was better than coke?
Yeah, significantly, for me. Not everyone feels that way. But I had like this weird ability to, I don't know, it's all brain chemistry, And for whatever reason, meth worked well with my brain chemistry. I could even like sleep, sort of. It was weird. And cocaine did not work well with my brain chemistry.
Every brain is different.
It was horrible. I hated it. I would be so sick the next day. So I did meth instead, but a few times. And then I saw it for 3 years, but I was still smoking weed and drinking. And after I'd been here, and by here I mean LA, 6 or 7 years, went through a gnarly breakup, and then cocaine came back into my life out here. And I lived right here in Venice, actually. And I was a nightmare. Like, I didn't even want to drive down Abbot Kinney when I was coming here. Like, I was such a nightmare to everybody around me during that time. I had a boyfriend, and I made his life awful. And my coke use just got progressively worse during that time. But I did manage to get certified to teach spin and yoga. So I was like teaching fitness, but I was this horrible drug addict. And I definitely wasn't doing anything acting related. And my car died because I wasn't paying to change the oil in it, and all the head gaskets blew at once, which I know like exactly what is happening. I've had so many cars where every single head gasket blows at once because I didn't change the oil, and I'm like, fuck, it's happening again. Not anymore. But car died, and so I had to leave. I left LA and moved down to San Diego. My mom had moved out here by then. And actually the reason that even happened was I was walking to work one morning. I worked on Abbot Kinney, lived right off of Abbot Kinney. And I was walking to work, and I'd been up all night doing coke, and I felt like shit. I already didn't have my car. And I went to a liquor store on Abbot Kinney on the way to work. It's like 9 a.m. And I bought a Red Bull and a thing of vodka and poured out half the Red Bull and filled up the rest with vodka and was like stumbling down the street, going to work. It was just so embarrassing. I knew all the people that like lived here, you know what I mean? And I'm stumbling to work, and as soon as I got there, my nose started bleeding. I went in the bathroom and my nose started bleeding. And I remember just saying, shit, and then my dad called me. And again, like I was saying, my dad and I are really close, which is a relationship I'm just so grateful for because of things like this. My dad called me, and normally I wouldn't answer when I was in that state, but I did. And as soon as I answered the phone, he said, Neener, which is what he calls me. He was like, Neener. And I was like, what? Yeah, like he sounded worried. And he said, are you okay? I feel like you're like dying. And he didn't really know the extent of what was happening.
Where did he get that feeling from?
I don't know.
You guys are that tuned in?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Yeah. I mean, people knew I wasn't doing well. And also, it was clear that I had gone off the rails at some point because I never even finished school, right? And I had all those like dreams, you know, and didn't, but I was still okay. You know, I wasn't homeless. Like I got to, you know, later. And he said, I feel like you're dying. And I said, I know, me too. And he said, all right, that's it. If your next phone call to me isn't that your mother is on her way up to get you from San Diego with a truck, you don't call me back. And I said, ever? And he was like, ever. You're done. You leave today. And I did. And I left that day after living here for 7 years or 8 years. And I was never going to leave. And I didn't want to walk away from the dreams. And I was mostly just so embarrassed. You know, I was so embarrassed because I hadn't finished school, like I said I was going to. And I'd held myself to this high intellectual standard. And I hadn't done anything that I said I was going to do, you know? But he told me to leave, so I did. And by that time, I kind of knew I had a problem. I mean, I knew I had a drug problem, but I didn't want to quit drinking. And when I went to my first meeting, I would go to 12-step meetings sometimes, I heard them say that you're also supposed to not drink. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm 28, 29 years old. This relationship's ending. I want to date. I want to get married. Like, you drink when you go on a date. That's what people do. I'm not going to stop doing that. And so I didn't, you know? So I moved down to San Diego, and I kind of got a little bit better at first because I didn't know anybody that was selling cocaine down there. But I didn't want to quit drinking, so I didn't. And I ended up meeting a guy, you know, there's the Marine base down there. And so I met a bunch of Marines, and one of these Marines who'd gotten out had a traumatic brain injury. He'd gone overseas to fight in Afghanistan, I think twice. And he'd had a traumatic brain injury, and I didn't know this, but prior to us dating, he'd had an Oxycontin problem. And so I met him, and people have asked me this before, like, was he on Oxy when we met? I really don't think so, because he was like super fit, pretty healthy. We drank a lot together, and after a year and a half, again, if not all the way healthy living though, right? Like, I was still drinking a ton. I wasn't really progressing in life. I was teaching fitness, like I would like scrape together jobs, but I just wasn't progressing as a human being in any real way. And I was out of town and couldn't get in touch with him. And I remember thinking like, oh, he's probably cheating on me, you know? And so I'm flying home, and I'm calling him. I was gone for 3 days, and I couldn't get in touch with him, land, drive out to his house, and literally like kick his door down in his room and bust in there. And there's no one in there but him. And there's like cigarette smoke in the air and pizza boxes everywhere. And he was not cheating on me. And I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, I haven't been able to get in touch with you. What's going on? And he said, oh, I'm sick. Like, I don't feel good. I was like, all right. So we went to the gas station to get some gas, and I was trying to get him to buy me. I was like, I drove all the way out here, so you need to put gas in my car. And his card got declined for $10 and then $5. And on the way back to his house, I said, look, have you started doing Oxycontin again? Because if you have, it's okay. I used to be a cocaine addict. This was like my big thing, but I quit once for 3 years. I can help you. And I'll never forget, we pulled up in the front yard of his house, and he said, so I am doing something, but it's not Oxycontin. And I just want to tell you that before I tell you this, I know what you're going to have to do. And I just want to say that I'm really sorry. And I wanted to do things differently with you. I said, okay, what the fuck is going on? And he said, I'm doing heroin. I'm on heroin. And I had the same response that most people would have when they hear heroin. Like, it felt, though I had this history with cocaine, it's like the scariest one, right? You think. And I was kind of in shock, and he'd walked inside, and I just made this decision that I think about a lot, where I thought, like, I'm not leaving this guy. I'm not. He's had these 2 tours of duty, and I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. So I didn't. And I went inside and I was Googling like how to help someone kick heroin. And, obviously you can't help somebody kick heroin, which I learned later. And, we went through this period of time where he would say that he had quit, but he hadn't really. And then at some point I started doing it also, and I don't even totally remember how that came to be. I think I just caught him once and basically said something to the effect of, okay, well, if it's so fucking good, let me try it. And I didn't know that if you get strung out on heroin, I genuinely didn't know this, even though I was old. If you get strung out on heroin, if you don't do it one day, you get really sick. And I didn't know that. And so I was like teaching and, long story short, I was strung out, right? And then I'd start doing it like every single day. And from that moment of realizing I was strung out until 5 years later, I'm homeless 10 months from that day. After all those years doing coke, I hadn't been homeless. From heroin to homeless was about 10 months. And I was even teaching fitness, when that happened. And from then on, I'm homeless or in jail or in like county programs for the next 5 years. Like none of that stops. I get arrested 5 times. My last arrest was for strong arm robbery, and they were going to give me a strike in California and send me to prison. And I got arrested for forging checks, making fake checks. They raided my place, and there was like a printer in the house with special ink to, make fake checks. And, things just got considerably worse over time, basically. And the story that I had mentioned to you on the phone was, so kind of my thing was I would live in sober livings, but I would still be using. And I'd figured out a way to pass P tests. And so like no matter what, under any circumstance, I could pass a piss test. So in 2014, I was in a sober living and I was doing my thing again, where I would take a drug test and I would pass even though I was clearly using. So it was New Year's Eve, 2014, and the sober living house manager woke me up and tested me that morning. And I passed the drug test with my like method, even though I was strung out. And so that night I was out at like a Chili's or something on New Year's Eve with a friend of mine that had used for a long time with me. He'd gotten busted and done like 2 years in prison or something, gotten out, was doing well. So he's sober, I'm not, and we're out at Chili's on New Year's Eve, and my my sober living owner called. And she was like, "Hey, Jeannine, so you've left some heroin in the bathroom and you can't come back." And I immediately went into like fake, defense lawyer. And I was like, that is circumstantial evidence. 8 other women live in that house who are in recovery. You have no way of knowing that that was my heroin. And I passed a drug test for you this morning. And that was true. That morning I passed a P test. And she said, "That's true, you did. And I'm not really sure how you've been doing that. But everyone else is here. And they're pretty sure it's yours. And I'm pretty sure it's yours. But I tell you what, if you can bring me a blood test that says that you're sober, I'll support you and you can come back to the house," which no one had ever asked me for a blood test before. So to her, of course, I was like, "Fine, I'll bring you one tomorrow." We get off the phone and I told my friend, I'm like, "Fuck, I can't go back to my sober living and I don't know what I'm going to do." So he got me a Motel 6 room and we go back to the Motel 6. And before he left, I was like, "Hey, give me your phone," because I had a flip phone. And I said, "Give me your phone. I need to Google what a blood test looks like. And I'm going to forge this blood test so I can bring it to her and go back to sober living, blah, blah, blah," just, And the whole time I was talking, he was just sort of sitting there like staring at me. And I said, "Look, and don't look at me like that. What am I supposed to do? I don't want to forge a blood test. She's making me forge this blood test. I don't want to do that. I was going to kick. I have a Suboxone," which is like the thing that you take to get off heroin. I was like, "I have a Suboxone. I was going to kick, but I can't kick outside. What am I supposed to do?" And he said, "I mean, you could get clean." And for some reason, even though I had been told stuff like that for years, I don't know why in that moment, I remember just sitting down and thinking like, fuck, like, should I try that? I am working so hard to make drugs work for me. Like my whole life has become about passing drug tests for people. My whole life is just about passing a piss test for this person or that person, And should I try that? But I had been, and this is one of the things I always try to share with people that are also addicts, I had been trying, right? Like nobody wants to live that way. And I had been trying. Every time I went to rehab, I really did the things, and I would use anyways, and I couldn't get more than 90 days, So he says that to me, but I had a little bit of dope on me and I didn't want to stop that night. And so when he came back the next day, I called a connect of mine, my heroin drug dealer. And I was like, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got kicked out of my sober living. I don't know where I'm going to go. And he said, well, I have a place you can stay. You can stay in the Doghouse in my backyard. And I was like, really? Okay, awesome. Are you sure? Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. And so my friend brought me over to this alley and I walked in the gate and it was more of like a little, I always tell people it's like a little shed. And there was like a dog mat on the ground and he let the dog go inside and let me stay out there in this little shed for 3 nights. And he padlocked me in from the outside at night. But one of the things I think I've like not included in the story is that he was also like a friend of mine. So I didn't feel kidnapped. I was in there like voluntarily and he was like bringing me heroin and bringing me meth. And so I spent 3 nights in that doghouse. And like one of the nights he opened the padlock and let someone in there for a few hours. And the last night that I was there, I was smoking meth, shooting heroin. I had a compact with like a light on it so that I could pick my face in the dark because I was like a really bad picker. And I was doing a crossword puzzle, the San Diego Reader, with my little light because I felt like it would like keep my brain working if I could do these crossword puzzles, right? So I'm like doing a crossword puzzle, smoking meth, picking my face. And thank God, another one of these Marine guys that I had met that was actually friends with the one that I had been using with called and said, hey, I'm back from, I think he'd been in Afghanistan also, and said, hey, I'm back. I'm out at 29 Palms. What are you doing? And I said, I am living in a doghouse in Oceanside, and I think I'm going to die. And he said, okay, that's it. If I come for you, will you come with me? And I said, yes, I will. And so there's like a Burger King right there. And so the next day, I like walked to that Burger King. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. I've told this story so many times. But like I had stolen from this person before, there was no real reason for him to like trust me, So anyways, I went to the Burger King and I called my mom. And she stopped by the Burger King on her way to church, and I wanted $5 to buy cigarettes. And she wouldn't give me any money. She gave me a Cliff Bar and some vitamin C tablets. And I remember thinking, like, I don't want this shit, And I remember saying the same thing to her. I was like, dude, so you're going to, like, make him buy me cigarettes, So he brought me out to 29 Palms, which is, like, a military base. And I kicked heroin for the last time. And that was January 15th, 2015. And from there, so by that time I was 34, and like I said, I had tried so many times. And so like the thing I always want to try to share with people is that I had no belief at all that this would work for me. I mean, fucking none. I felt like such a loser, to be like a woman, 34, 35, I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have an ID. No car, obviously, like I'm a felon now. I've been arrested all these times. And I just felt like my life was never going to change, And the only reason I even stopped that time was because I was just tired of being homeless, Like by the end, I almost would have rather have gone to jail again, I just couldn't stand being homeless anymore. And while I was out there at his house, I had a friend that owned a sober living. And he let me move into the sober living. And I share that also because the people that have relapsed a lot, like I just felt like all of the relapses were such a sign of my character as a person and like what a failure I was, And what was true though was that I already had a sponsor when I was there and I knew this guy that owned a sober living. And so all of those relapses, all of those times that I came in, they weren't failures. Every time I came in, I was gathering resources and knowledge, and they were available to me when I was ready to execute on that information, And so like someone that's been in and out for a long time, you probably know someone that could sponsor you if you want to do 12-step, Like we've got these resources that we've acquired, and that's how I came to look at it over time. And before I went out to his house, when I was still in the sober living, I'd done one thing. I'd emailed somebody that was looking for a spin teacher because I would go on Craigslist and I would see people hiring for spin teachers. I would do two things if I could get access to internet. I would look at Facebook, and I would see all my friends getting married and buying houses, because they all did graduate, you know. And I'd go on Craigslist, and if somebody was hiring a fitness instructor, I would like send them an application. I think just to kind of see, because I'd taught at the Beverly Hills Country Club over here. I taught at like really nice places. And I think I wanted to see if I could still get called. And I'd done that. And this girl called me back, and we set up an interview that I couldn't go to. This was before I'd gone, you know, to kick. And when I came back, I'm in the sober living, and, you know, you have to get a job. And I thought, I wonder if that lady would still interview me. And so I reached back out to her, and she set up an interview. And I went down, and I auditioned, and I got a job, and I started teaching there once a week. And then that went to 16 classes, and I ended up buying that studio at 4 years sober. I owned that studio. So from like cashing my checks at a check cash place and no car, to at some point, obviously moving out of the sober living, a client actually gave me a car. And I've learned that, you know, the work ethic, because the other thing that I was worried about, my two biggest fears were getting married. No one's ever going to fucking marry me. And I've got this terrible credit. I'm never going to be able to buy a house or like have a real life, you know? And I learned that, and it's a common problem for most addicts, your work ethic and the relationships you make today will determine your future way more than the mistakes of your past. And a client gave me a car when I had 7 months clean. She didn't even know I was in recovery. And at 7 months, I had like $1,000 saved, and I went to go look at cars, and I was nowhere near buying a car. You know, I'm 35, you know, and I just was so bummed out. And I remember doing the math on all this, and I was like, I'm not going to move forward in my life for years, you know. But I was wrong, you know. And at about 7 months, a client, you know, gave me a car. After a year, I moved out. But there were three things really made it different for me this time, I think, from all the other times. So the first thing, right when I'd first come back and I was in this sober living, I was in a sober living where I used to use, you know, and I was at the McDonald's, and there was a guy that I used to use with. And he was like, hey, where the fuck you been? And I said, oh, you know, around. And he was like, all right, well, I got a shot for you in here. Come on, get your ass in here. And I was still sick. I was still kind of dope sick. I had like 3 weeks. And I said, okay, I'll be right back. And I remember running out of McDonald's, and I like ran up the hill to my sober living, and my house manager was standing outside, and we'd had this really like combative relationship over the years. He'd kicked me out from living there a couple of times. And I ran up the hill, and I saw him standing there, and I was like, Steve, I just saw so-and-so at the bathroom and at McDonald's, and he's going to give me a free shot of heroin. And like, I know I'm not supposed to, but I just keep thinking it's free heroin. Like, I should go back. And I remember he got so mad at me, he like put out a cigarette, and he was like, that shit isn't free. What has that cost you in your lifetime? That's like the worst return on an investment I've ever seen a human being make. Like, that isn't free. I can't believe we're even having this conversation. And I said, all right, you're right. That's not free. Fine, okay. And I went up into like the little apartment that I had there, and he followed me like 10 minutes later and said, I'm not done with you. And I remember thinking, of course you're not done with me. And I said, Steve, he used to be a crack addict. I was like, if somebody offered you free crack, I know that you would think about it for a second. You can't tell me that you wouldn't. And before I could even finish, he kind of cut me off and was like, no, that would never happen to me, because I've taken a stand in this community and people know who I am, and that would never happen to me. You have been committed to a criminal and an addict lifestyle for so long. You have to take a stand in this community. Like, you can't ride this line anymore where you're still talking to those guys, but you're also trying to be in recovery. Like, you have to pick a side. You have to take a stand. And what that looked like for me in action was I finally like deleted old contacts from my phone. I took a commitment at a meeting, which I had never, you know, done before. And I was like, no, he's right. Like, I need to be the person that you don't come to me if you relapsed and ask me how to help you beat a drug test. You know, like, I need to all the way pick a side if I'm going to do this, you know? And then at about 90 days, I had a birthday, and I was turning 35 in this sober living on the couch. No idea, you know, nothing. And I was so depressed. I couldn't believe I was 35 and this was, you know, my life. And everybody in sober living tells you, like, that's okay. You know, you're clean. Just like focus on that, you know? And I remember thinking, that's not really doing it for me this time though, because if the ghost of Christmas Future had like floated into the hallway at my high school when I was a senior, I mean, like, hey, Jeannine, I have a crystal ball here, Do you want to see where you're going to be at 35? I would have been like, yes, of course, show me. I'm sure I'm going to be rich and famous and married and live in a mansion. Yes, show me. And if the Ghost of Christmas Future had been like, yeah, no, actually none of that shit's going to happen. But what you will have going for you that day is that you will have 90 days off of heroin, which will be a massive accomplishment for you at that time. I just couldn't get past that, right? Like, I never would have thought this would be my life. And I fucking failed at life. And like, what is the point of even trying at this point, you know? And I was doing this little meditation. I was doing like a gratitude meditation. And I went outside on the deck of this sober living. And I kind of considered my sober living like run down. And, you know, I wasn't as grateful for it as I should have been, you know? And I remember sitting there and I did this meditation. And the meditation that day was on gratitude. And there was this quote from an author. And the quote was, "Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It makes what we have enough and more." Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It makes what we have enough and more. That was like the meditation. I did the meditation. I took my headphones out. And I was suddenly like overcome with gratitude that I wasn't dope sick, you know? And I know you've interviewed enough opiate addicts and heroin addicts to know. You hear people talk about being sick, right? And like, for so many years, I had to have $20 just to breathe, you know, every single day. You wake up like in fear of your own body. It's a time bomb. And in that moment, I was just so grateful that I wasn't dope sick. I didn't have to get well, you know? And I was feeling that. And then I noticed there was like this really nice view off of the deck of my sober living. And I thought, wow, that's like a really beautiful view. And then I realized, well, that didn't just get there. That mountain didn't just get there while I was meditating. That's always been there. I just couldn't see it. And I had this weird thought that, like, did my heroin addiction make me more grateful? Like, did my heroin addiction actually, like, leave me better off? And what I was feeling, and I recently actually even had the opportunity to give a TED Talk about this, what I was feeling was something called post-traumatic growth, which is this phenomenon where after a traumatic event or challenging event, you can actually come out of it happier, stronger, more resilient, and your life can be better as a direct result of the traumatic event, right? And like everybody's heard of post-traumatic stress, obviously. And when people go overseas to fight, they're told, okay, you're gonna come back one of two ways from this conflict. You're gonna come back status quo as you are, or you're gonna come back damaged. And we want status quo. But there's a third way back from trauma, which is that you can actually come back from trauma better. And that's what I was feeling in that moment. And it was like a few years before I learned that terminology and was able to put all of that together. But the thing that I thought that I would never get past was feeling like such a fucking failure that I hadn't gone to law school, that I hadn't done all those things, you know? And over the years of my sobriety, I've come to see my heroin addiction as the best thing that ever happened to me. And like I wouldn't change 1 second of any of that. And I definitely didn't feel that way, you know? And there was, when I was living in Venice, this guy that I was dating, my boyfriend, we were arguing. And it's so ironic, all the things that I like said to him in this argument. But I remember saying to him, all right, look, take it easy. You're kind of fucking overreacting. It's just coke. I'm not shooting heroin. I've never been arrested. I haven't been fired. You know, like, it's fine. And he said, you know what, Jeannine? You're right. None of those things have happened. And you're slick enough and you're smart enough that you could probably go the rest of your life with none of those things happening. But you'll be sick 4 days out of every week. You're always about to get fired. You're always broke. But worst of all, you'll have to live your life knowing you're not the woman you were supposed to be. But you're right, you could do that. And I realized all those years later, that feeling that I had on the balcony, that everything that he said was true. I could have continued doing that like cocaine, alcohol dance forever, where I could keep a job teaching for like 18 months, you know? Like I was good enough, but I would never have actually gotten to a place where I was the most full version of me, right? Like the best version of me, the not muted version of me. And heroin took that off the table. You know, heroin forced me to choose abstinence and sobriety for me. And I think there are a bunch of different ways back from addiction, you know, anything that I've learned that the longer I've done my show. But for me, abstinence and the recovery work, like it forced me to choose life. And for that reason, all of the shame that I felt around the addiction and the homelessness, all of that, when I look back, I don't regret any of it, you know? And I even got to own that studio, you know? And I still had shitty credit the whole time, which is another thing I tell people. Like, you know, a client offered to co-sign on the lease. You know, like all of the relationships you make are how you're gonna build your future. And so I just wanna encourage people, try not to let those logical things get in the way of your willingness to move forward. Because once we start doing what we know to be right for ourselves, and we start getting a little bit more in alignment with who we really are, logical timelines don't work or aren't what happen anymore, right? We start moving on this different timeline where you get a miracle, like somebody gives you a fucking car. Or at 4 years, you're able to buy your own gym in Encinitas and, you know, in San Diego. Like all of these things start to happen that I would never have thought would have been possible. I mean, I gave a TED Talk because I was a homeless heroin addict, you know? And so now, like I went back for a high school reunion, and my 10-year I didn't go. And for the next one, I did go, and I felt totally okay. You know, I was like, I'm so good with what happened, you know, and I didn't think that that would ever be the case for me, you know?
You're amazing.
Yeah.
What was a lesson you learned from all of this that really just has helped you?
I think that our challenges become our biggest assets, not liabilities. And I've been able to apply that into my life and recovery as well, right? Like right after I bought that gym and I was so happy, 6 months later, COVID happened. And I was devastated. And I remember thinking like, dude, I'm a fucking good person. Like I kicked heroin, you know, but I can't, you know, like why did this have to happen? But that ended up being such a wonderful time in our little community. And I know it's, you know, it's hard to say that because I don't want to like, you know, undercut obviously the impact that had globally. But for us in our little space, we were able to create this community where we worked out outside and everybody had a safe place where they could come. And like all of the men and women that were able to come to my studio would tell me they were better at life when they went home than some of their friends who weren't able to get out and like work out. You know, they were able to bring that energy home with them. And so even that had a ripple effect. Again, this thing that I thought that would be the absolute end of me. And then I also learned from that I can handle a lot of stuff. I mean, that was like really, really, really stressful, obviously. You know, you're still on the hook for rent. You're on the hook for absolutely every utility. You know, there was no breaks given, you know, at least in my area. But, you know, everything had come to a standstill. And I panicked. But again, I learned that those challenges become our biggest assets. And I wouldn't change that either. You know, I wouldn't change having had bought it at that time, you know? And so I think that's been my biggest lesson, this idea that post-traumatic growth is, you know, is this psychological phenomena that can happen. And I've gotten to learn more about it and how it happens. And I can share that with people when they're struggling also. You know, there are all these little things that you can do, like sharing your story and being of service and, you know, emotional regulation, like working out. All of these things can lead you to a place where you can come out of something like that with a greater appreciation for life and like greater feelings of personal strength and often a development with some sort of spirituality. And all of those things can actually leave somebody better off. And I'm so grateful that you know, that I know that now, you know.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, Jeannine, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for giving people a platform, you know. I really appreciate that. You have the ability to reach so many people, and that's kind of just what I kept thinking about on the way up here. I was like, fuck, I just want to help some 32-year-old girl who's like, well, I have Hep C and I'm covered in track marks and no one's ever going to fucking marry me. They might. You will.
Information is power. And
yeah.
Positive stories like yours are inspirational,
yeah.
and sad ones are scared straight program.
Well, and also those people, I know sometimes you do follow-ups.
Sure.
You know, and it's hard to believe, and I dress up on purpose, but I looked like any one of your, like really, I looked like any one of your Skid Row stories.
That's right.
Like you would have crossed this. I had open wounds on my face. When I went to detox, one of the times I had like 3 different types of bacteria in my wounds. I had like strep, staph, and something else in my, like I was gross. The girls in the detox didn't want to shower after me. I like overheard them telling somebody. It was bad. It was really bad. And I didn't think that I could ever be different. And I was able to be different. So
Good for you.
I appreciate you letting us share our stories.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you.
When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these 2 books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.